Hello, and welcome to the most honest and secure mental health podcast, brought to you in collaboration with the Talley App. Launching in October, Talley's purpose-built platform will facilitate daily anonymous group and peer-to-peer conversations. In the meantime, the TalleyTalk podcast will serve as a taster for what's to come. For the latest news and updates from the Talley App launch, follow @talley.app on Instagram, or you can visit www.talleyapp.com. Please also be aware that this podcast at times will cover sensitive and triggering topics due to the nature of conversation. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hello, Talliers. How are we feeling? Good. Let's begin. Welcome to the TalleyTalks podcast season 2. Each week we focus on a different topic of conversation. And this week we're talking about abortion and the way that can affect your mental health. And as ever, we are joined by a guest with direct experience and knowledge of said topic. We're so lucky to be joined by Ella. Now, just let me say, we are an anonymous platform, so we have chosen to give her a nickname. We've called her Ella. Ella, hello.
Hello.
How are you? I hear an American twang. Where are you in the world?
It is an American twang. I am from Indiana, United States.
I love it. Do you know, I feel like Michael Palin. Each week I talk to guests from all over the world. I think next week we've got an Eskimo from the North Pole. I don't know. I don't know. You're such a superstar for joining us. These conversations designed to go so in depth, and as it's anonymous, we're hoping you can show some real insight into the topic. And I know it's not easy to talk about. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here to be talking about this topic that I care so much about.
Okay, well, let's begin with open up about your experiences and why you think it's beneficial to talk about it on this podcast.
Because I experienced having an abortion. I had one about 8 years ago now, just at a moment in my life where I was young, fresh out of college, trying to figure out what I was doing with my life, like in and out of a relationship that I didn't necessarily want to be in, just one of those transitional moments in your life of just trying to figure it all out. And then what was fun and just pleasurable, I ended up getting pregnant. And I did not know one person in my life that had had an abortion. I had only ever read about, heard about, learned about abortion through, I had a private school upbringing. You're taught in school that abortion is bad. You are going to go to hell if you have an abortion, no matter, how much you ask for forgiveness. And you see things on TV that scare the heck out of you regarding becoming pregnant and choosing to have an abortion. So yeah, I found out I was pregnant. And like from the minute I found out, I was just like, how can I get rid of this? How can I fix this? This isn't what I want for my life. I don't want to be with this person. Some feelings and thoughts that people do and don't have once they find out that they're pregnant. But yeah, so from that point, I recall trying to get in touch with my gynecologist at the time. And it was pretty much what I thought it was going to be, calling the gynecologist. I was told, you can have the baby and we can talk to you about adoption. That was the only option, trying to speak to my gynecologist as a scared 23-year-old that I was being given. And I didn't really know who to talk to because, like I said, I didn't know anybody that had had an abortion. So from there, I ended up going to a local clinic and, talking to the doctor and having just a good conversation about, this isn't where I want my life to be. This isn't what I want to happen. I just really want to fix this. So that's kind of what brought me to where my journey began. The decision to have the abortion was only the beginning of it. That was, for me, a very easy decision to make. But it was really after I had the abortion that I really started struggling with my mental health. Yeah.
It's so fascinating because you touched upon that kind of religious aspect, because it is kind of expected of you to preserve this life and to have the baby. But yeah. I mean, that can be very frustrating because at the end of the day, it is your life and it is your future. And having a baby is a huge responsibility. So did you feel any kind of inkling of guilt because of that religious kind of pressure? Are you religious yourself?
I grew up religious. I am a spiritual being. Honestly, that is the thing. Religion is what had me feeling any amount of shame I felt walking into the clinic. You know, there'll be people, it's kind of like what you might see in a movie. Like there were people standing outside of the clinic with their signs talking about all sorts of things to do with religion and how you're going to go to hell if you have this abortion. And that really, seeing those people and having the flashes of religion were the things in my mind that had me second guessing any decision I was making. I knew for myself, if I had never learned anything about how bad abortion was according to, Catholicism, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. Honestly, I would have just thought it was just a choice, like your birth control.
I mean, it's one thing to be pregnant. It's terrifying when you're not in a position to keep the baby and provide for the baby. But then you've got all these religious, I don't want to use a derogatory term, but religious people making you feel guilty and campaigning outside the clinic. And that dread and that overwhelming sense of guilt, did that make you for any moment reconsider your decision?
It didn't in the moment. It more so made me speed up and get into the parking lot faster and get into the building faster so nobody would see me.
Wow. Yeah. And that process as well, I guess it's different for people in the United States than it is over here. Because medically, America's so expensive. Healthcare in general. Was that a burden upon you? Like, how did you pay for it? Was that another added element of stress?
No, it was not. I paid for it myself. Yes, it was a very hefty chunk of change, but it's kind of like when you know you want something and you want something bad enough, you're going to find the funds for it. That was exactly the situation I was in. Like, I didn't necessarily have the money for the abortion, but it's
something you needed to do.
Yeah. It was 1000% what I needed to do. So I knew walking in, like, it was going to be basically an investment for me to turn my life around.
What people don't consider is your position in life at that moment. I'm not making any assumptions, but and you're the only person who would know whether you are capable of bringing this baby into the world and providing. And I think it's really unfair that people would think otherwise because they don't know your lifestyle or the predicaments you may be in or what your goals are for the future. So I think that's really unfair. And the idea of people campaigning with placards and banners and stuff like that outside the clinic or wherever is quite disgusting. Again, I don't want to be derogatory, and I respect religion and I respect belief, but I do think that's wrong. That's just forcing pressure onto someone they don't even know. I'll tell you a story. My brother, over Christmas, it was literally a week after my mum died. She died at Christmas. And he came with his partner and said, we're having a baby. And you know what? We was all elated because some good news finally, because we'd been through this bloody dreadful time over Christmas. And for me, Christmas is ruined forever. And we're thinking, wow, a precious little being being brought into the world. We can't wait. But then once that kind of excitement died down, me and my other brothers, the older ones, discussed it amongst ourselves. And we said, well, he's not in a position to bring a baby into this world because he's suffering from depression. His mum's just died. His job's unstable, especially because of COVID. He does, handiwork. He fixes things, builds things, stuff I could never do. And I'm really impressed by him. And sadly, they lost the baby a couple of weeks later. So it wasn't an abortion. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to connect it to your story in the sense that that was the worst thing that could happen to him, losing the baby. Now, they have decided not to try again, and he's on a course of antidepressants, and he is focusing on himself. So it wasn't an abortion, but the point is, it was the worst thing in the world to happen to him. Whereas for you and a lot of other women out there, abortion was the only choice. Would you agree it was the only choice?
Yeah, and to kind of circle back to a bit of what you were saying, like, you're right. These people don't have any idea that even the people in your life that give their opinion on whatever it is you're doing, they don't know all of the facts. Like, unless you are telling them every single thing going on in your life, like they don't know everything. These people outside picketing, they don't know everything. The doctor's office you call in a crying saying you're pregnant and they're very judgmental. They don't know anything. Like, yeah, at that time, I had been in an on again, off again relationship, and I had finally made the decision to leave the relationship. It was no longer healthy for me, no longer healthy for him. And, we were still messing around. And I ended up, getting pregnant. And it was, for me, as time has gone on, I honestly do sit back and think, that was one of the smartest decisions I ever made. And I know that's probably sounding very controversial to some people that might be listening, but it really was, because that put me in check. And that was a moment in my life that if I am making this decision to say I'm going to have this abortion and to commit to myself, like I'm going to make these changes. And sometimes it takes having something catastrophic as finding out you are pregnant to then do something about it. And I'm not saying that I had an abortion and then right then and there, I decided, I'm going to turn my life around. Like, I really struggled after the fact, even though it was 1000% what I wanted. But people don't always know everything when they say something. Because when I have told people that I have had an abortion, a lot of times, like, I just get like a weird look. Like, what are you talking about? You did that? Like, so many people have abortions all the time and we don't know. Like, it's like, check your face.
Well, that's the thing, whether it's a religious aspect or whether they've been directly involved in an abortion, people kind of look at it as murder. That's a very strong word. But can I ask how far you was gone in terms of the pregnancy?
It was either 7 or 8 weeks. I was 7 or 8 weeks along. So it wasn't too far. And, at the time, I didn't have any idea that I could possibly be pregnant. I was in a very stressful job. I was like drinking a lot, like to cope with all the stress I was going through. So I literally had no idea I was pregnant until a week before I had an abortion.
Wow.
It finally just dawned on me one day, like I just kept feeling sick and I just kept thinking I was hungover. Like, I finally took a pregnancy test one day and it was kind of like what you see in the movies sometimes, they'll be taking a test and they're like, that's wrong. And they'll take another one. That's wrong. Like I took so many pregnancy tests and every time I was just crying and crying. Like I was like, how did this happen? Like, I obviously know how it happened, but I was like, how did I get here? Like it was, I had no idea.
But now you'll probably create a parallel universe for yourself in your mind and think, what if I had the baby and you mentioned you was drinking? What if you had the baby and the drinking got worse and maybe you went into something heavier and now you've got a little person in the world you're wholly responsible for, and then just imagine that baby's life and your life. And I can't think about it. Obviously, I've not been through this, but I'm just picturing these scenarios in my mind, and I can't help but imagine what it would be like for you if you went ahead with the pregnancy, had the baby, and what your life would be like. That guilt and your mental health, I'm sure, would just deteriorate. And obviously this is all hypothetical, but you do have to kind of step back and look at the scenarios, what the scenarios could be 6, 7, 8 steps down the line. But you sound like you've made the right decision. And obviously all I can do as the host is support your decision and hopefully try and understand it. And of course, we want the listeners to be able to understand it as well. Do you still feel guilty at all? Do you still think about what if?
Okay, couple things. First, the what if thing has only ever come up when like I was saying, it was a toxic relationship that I was in. So from time to time, when I would hear from the person, stuff like that would come up. That's where the guilt and shame and all of that came from that I felt post after my abortion, was the things that the guy would say to me, like how, like, I am going to hell. Like, I can't believe you did that to my child. Like all of those kinds of things, the words that would come out of his mouth to me regarding the decision. So sometimes I will sit back and think, what if, when every blue moon I hear from him, and I'm like, I am glad I am not co-parenting. That would not be good for my mental health. So that, and then coupled with, yes, I started going to counseling after the whole experience. And I did take medication for depression and anxiety for quite some time. And just doing a lot of therapy, getting into a lot of mindfulness. I've gotten into yoga, becoming like even a yoga teacher, like all of these things that I've jumped into deep self-development, and even gone as far as beginning to coach other women on their post-abortive experience, trying to find healing within themselves. Because after my abortion, I did try to go on, as we're talking about religion, my therapist, the only thing that she knew of for post-abortive people, for women and men, was a religious retreat. And, you know, that's the only thing at the time. And this has been like 7 years ago now. It was not too long after my abortion, but I did end up going on a religious retreat. And it was solely focused on getting forgiveness from the Lord and me finding a way to forgive the person that I had been with. And yeah, I walked away from that retreat feeling even more like discouraged, because like, this is my healing journey. This is my, you know, my process. This is all about me. And I really struggled with that for a long time, and honestly got me further away from religion because of I need God's forgiveness more than I needed forgiveness from myself, if that makes any sense.
Well, it just goes to show, once something like this happens, it's not a paint by numbers recovery. It's not one size fits all. Come to this religious retreat, stay here for a couple of weeks. You can learn these types of things, ask these sorts of questions, and then you'll go away feeling like a brand new woman. It's not as simple as that. Was you pressured to go to this retreat, or did you go voluntarily?
I went voluntarily because I just wanted to be around others that had an abortion as well. Like I was saying, I didn't know one person that had an abortion before going on this retreat. And I ended up meeting other people that had an abortion. So it felt like community, like having a shared experience, but it also pushed me towards wanting to do something greater with my experience for people that does not involve religion at all. Like just involves solely yourself and your experience and working through what you have had.
Well, of course, you make your own decisions and you stand by them. I'm trying to think of the retreat. And now, obviously, I might say the wrong thing, but I imagine a very stern-looking nun. Have you ever seen the Blues Brothers, where she can kind of float? or a priest?
It definitely was not that. It was more so, there was like one priest that we would see from time to time, but then other women from the various congregations that would put on the retreat. So you had to be somebody who has in the past had an abortion. Just to stick on that for a minute, like, I ended up saying, so I was talking to you a minute ago about the people outside with their posters and all of that when I was going to the clinic. Well, so, you know, at this retreat, you're talking about your experience and what you went through and whatnot. And I was saying one of the things that made me feel a lot of shame was pulling into, I couldn't find the word for a minute, the clinic. And there were these people standing out there with their posters. And one of the ladies interrupted me and was like, did you ever stop to look at what all of the posters said? And I was like, well, no, I was trying to get into the clinic. They're yelling stuff at you. Of course, I didn't see all the posters. I only saw like a couple talking about I'm killing a baby and I'm going to hell. And this lady said, I am one of those people that stands outside of those clinics. And if you would have seen my poster, it says, no matter what choice you make, I'm praying for you.
Oh.
So I immediately felt some shame from that because I was like, well, here I am dogging on these people, but I didn't see that poster. So that's not the experience that I had.
And she's like, I spent 2 hours on that poster. You could have read it.
Yeah, right. But, it just goes to show that you never know like what's going through people's head, no matter what they're doing, the amount of craziness they're doing or not. Like there are still good people that show up to pick it.
Well, it just sounds contradictory. And forgive me now, she seems like a good egg, like read this poster. This is good advice. How dare you? But then you go to a retreat, and I suppose, well, it being a religious retreat, people there, I'm not sure whether this is obvious or not, think abortion is wrong. Was that being rammed down your throat? Because the last thing you need at one of these retreats, which is meant to be Zen-like and spiritual and relaxing, the last thing you need is that being rammed down your throat. Was it kind of like lectures? Because it just sounds contradictory, but tell me if I'm wrong.
It was a lot of reflection. You would have maybe like a guided meditation or something, and then you had time to reflect, or various activities. It wasn't so much lecturing, but there were points when, you could go to confession. And I think the end goal is that you're going to go to confession and absolve yourself from all of these sins, which I could jump gears for a moment. I'm super into like the complete other end of the spectrum, the woo-woo stuff. Okay. So I did go to confession and I did ask for forgiveness. I've forgiven myself for everything I've done, all of that in relation to the abortion, the relationship, all of that stuff. So a few years go by and somebody is doing this reading for me, an Akashic record reading. And this lady brings up that basically you're clearing your karma from your past lives. And she brings up something about when I was in my early 20s. And I mean, she's describing all this stuff. And I just said to her, well, that's interesting that you're saying I still need to clear this karma, because I went to confession and I thought that cleared me.
Wow. So did that just make you doubt the process of confession? Because I thought you're going to confession. And now, I mean, I'm not an expert. I watched The Godfather Part 3 the other day and he confesses. But then you just assume, and I'm not a very religious person, but you just assume you go in and you're cleansed. But it doesn't sound like that's the case.
No. And so it just goes to show that whatever it is that, is rammed down your throat. Well, in my case, it was religion forever. And I always thought it was like, I say, I'm sorry. I make amends. I do whatever the penance is that I'm told to do. And then I'm good. But it goes to something deeper. It goes to, I did ask for forgiveness for what I did, but did I really forgive myself? Have I really worked with myself to understand why I did what I did? And am I okay with what I did at the end of the day? And I have forgiven myself a million times for, getting myself into that situation and having to make that choice altogether. But it's still like, sometimes it still comes up and I just have to stop and hey, but you're good. You are a good person. You have done this. You made a wrong choice and you ended up pregnant, but you're not a bad person. So I just think that, these ideas that we ask for forgiveness and we're forgiven, sometimes we're so focused on wanting God's forgiveness as opposed to our own forgiveness, is what I'm trying to say in my roundabout way.
I'd just like to interrupt the show and give our two amazing partner podcasts a quick shout out. Firstly, My Mental Mates is the podcast opening up the conversation on mental health by having guests share their experiences and discussing the good, the bad and the ugly of mental health. At the end of each episode, each guest gets to choose songs to add to the My Mental Mates Hit the Reset Button music playlist, available on Spotify and Apple Music. Podcast host Anthony started the podcast in line with running the London Marathon this year for Charity Mind. Good boy. So head to your podcast provider and check it out now. Secondly, now in its second season, the Men Talk Health podcast features discussions surrounding things such as men's mental health and what it's like to live with a mental disorder. The conversations are candid and authentic, tackling taboo topics which aren't talked about in the public sphere. Men's Talk's main aim is to encourage men to discuss mental health with their friends, breaking down the stigma that it's weak or not masculine to be vulnerable and open around your mates. To listen to the latest episodes, search Men Talk Health Podcast into all platforms, or you can follow Men Talk Health's host at _Luke Brand on Instagram and use the link in his bio to access the latest episodes. If you want a new mental health podcast to add to your collection, welcome to Men Talk Health. Thank you, and back to the show. And have you forgiven yourself? I think that's the big question.
Absolutely, because I love my life. I love where I am. It took me some time to get to where I am, and I'm happy. I'm happy with the decision that I made.
Do you have kids now? I'm being quite forward with it. Have you had kids since?
I have not. I was a school teacher for many years, and I always looked at those kids as my kids.
Okay, that's really, really sweet.
But I've always thought about the kids that I worked with. Like, I always saw them as a member of my family when they were in my class and even after they were in my class.
Oh, that's really, really sweet. So you don't want to go older because teenagers are a nightmare.
Teenagers are a lot of fun, but that would have been a whole nother can of worms to get into.
We'll have to do another episode. Let me ask you as well. I am going to revert back to what you were talking about before. Your ex-partner. Now, obviously, and I'm assuming he knows about the abortion.
Okay, so this is not one of my finer moments. So we were not on speaking terms when I found out that I was pregnant, and I had the abortion. And then a month or so later, he starts, texting me and whatnot. And I was saying, things are done between the two of us. And I ended up eventually just saying, like, I had an abortion, like, we are done, whatever. Yeah, that didn't go over so well.
Oh, so he was really upset and angry.
Yes, he was very upset with me for not telling him that I was pregnant and for doing that it was his child and how could I have done that to him. But I don't need to justify why I did anything. But, after the fact, that was something that I felt really guilty about for not involving him in any of it. And then just the toll that it took on him. And eventually I ended up putting myself to the side and like deciding like, oh my gosh, like I made this decision. I did this to him. Like, 'cause I was constantly hearing about how awful I was and I had ruined his life and, things like that. And I eventually just ended up like, I want to make this better. I don't want you to have a bad life. And I went back to him.
Oh no. Oh no.
And it was,
that was a twist.
Yeah, yeah, I was out drinking one night and I ended up seeing him. And from there, like we started seeing one another again. But if it was toxic before, it was a million times worse now. Yeah, I was just constantly having the decision to have an abortion like held over my head. And
you was trying to make it up to him.
Yeah, we saw one another for a little bit of time after that. And that's my biggest piece of advice to anybody that chooses to go back to somebody after they break up before or after an abortion. Don't do it. It was awful. I think I cried more and felt worse about myself than I had ever. It was just like fireworks, not in a good way between the two of us. And eventually it ended not so great. So
fireworks? You mean dynamite? Fireworks are pretty.
Yeah, you're right. It was like
C4
TNT
dynamite
stuff.
and grenades all at the same time. So that second time you kind of got back together, how long did that last? Because was it volatile from the get-go or
oh, yeah.
was there a point where you thought, okay, this could work?
it could not have worked. It's never going to work when you try to get something going or press resume on something when you're coming into it feeling awful for what you have done to the person. Because I felt like it was just always me constantly saying, I'm sorry I did that. Just never really feeling like you're ever actually forgiven. It was on and off for some months. But yeah, eventually it just had to end. And that was where the real work really got started in my therapy.
I bet it did. I bet it did. And the thing is, going back and being sorry and asking for forgiveness, he is not stupid. He's going to hover that over your head.
Oh, yeah.
And have this like real power complex about it. And that's really dangerous. And I'm glad you seem to have left and you're doing all right now, because the shit could have hit the fan, basically.
It did, and beyond.
Those decisions are never easy, and these decisions change your life. And it's only in retrospect you realize if you made the right or wrong decision. And it does sound like you've made the right decision. I want to know more about the actual procedure. I mean, is it a painful procedure? Is it invasive? Is it very simple and there's nothing to it?
So there are two choices. I chose the medical route. So depending on how far along you are, you might only have one choice, and that would be the surgical. And you would have to stay at the clinic, have somebody take you there and pick you up. But for me, I was lucky to have the two choices of surgical or medical. And you go for your first appointment, and it's been years since I've had mine, so it might be different now. They do the ultrasound, all of that, check you out, and then you meet with the staff to talk about, I'm consenting, this is what I want to have. And then you have to leave and come back 24 hours later, just so that they are sure that you're not making some on-the-spot decision, all that kind of stuff, that you're thinking this through. So then when you go back, that's when you meet with the doctor. And I took the first pill there, and then they're telling you all about what things you might need at home. So mine was called an at-home abortion, and some people will call it like an at-home miscarriage. So then they give you a list of all the things you might want because you could experience some pain, which you most certainly do. And then, so the next day I took the next pill, and I just remember it was Easter weekend. And my family was all going to be celebrating for Easter. So I took the first pill on a Friday, the second one on a Saturday. And I remember feeling fine. And I was just laying in bed, and I was like, oh, this is going to be fine. This is, it's just going to pass. It's all good. I am running to the restroom. So if I thought I was nauseous before, I was so nauseous. And I mean, to get graphic for you, it was basically the baby was coming out into the toilet, the little sack. And I am getting sick in a trash can as it's all happening. And I just remember laying on the floor for a long time that day. And I just heard my family in the next room, having a good old time. Nobody knew what I was doing.
I was going to say, did they know? So you've got Agadoo playing in the next room. Does anybody want some vol-au-vents? And then you're going through this horrific thing.
Yeah. So I just kept saying, I think I ate something bad. I felt awful, and I felt really bad for the next day or so. But, I sucked it up. I was bleeding a lot. And I just remember going to Easter lunch the next day with my whole family and just feeling like absolute poop. But people didn't know about it. And then
can I I mean, I don't want to be graphic or anything, but obviously this fetus left your body. What happened to the fetus?
It got flushed down the toilet.
Really? So I was thinking it was going to be bigger than it was.
No, it was just a little tiny sack.
And did you look at it? Did you look down and...
Well, I looked down, I saw it, and I think that was the first moment that I was like, oh, what did you just do? So seeing it really freaked me out. I think if I hadn't seen it at all, I might not have felt any sort of emotion about it. I can't say for sure because I don't know. But
well, because at the end of the day, you look down, and that must have been so difficult. I'm trying to pick my words now. I can't imagine it. So the fact that you went through it and you're trying to articulate it into words, I think you're just so brave. And the process of just flushing, the simplest thing in the world. We do it 10 times a day, 15 if you got a dicky stomach. And then it's gone. It's just gone. All this stress and mental attack and everything like that, everything that's been spinning through your mind for weeks, it's just gone.
Yeah.
It's just such a simple gesture. It's just gone. Wow.
Yeah. And then I just remember like laying back in bed, and I don't remember really having a lot of thoughts about the whole process other than feeling awful after the fact, like physically awful after the fact, until my ex started getting in contact with me. And that's when, the whole like ball got rolling on the shame, guilt. I'm an awful person. What did I do? Like, it's one thing to like think something, and then to have somebody else say those things to you. You're like, oh crap. Like,
what does it do to your body medically? Now, you said you just took a pill or a couple of pills. That sounds simple enough. I guess it would be more serious if you was 4 or 5 months down the line. But did you have any side effects for a while? Was you still able to have sex? Does it affect your ability to have kids in the future? I mean, I'm being extreme, but I don't know. So I'm going to ask the questions.
So after the fact, I felt very crampy and like very nauseous. And then I actually ended up bleeding for a couple of months after the fact, which any person that I checked in with regarding it, like, is this normal? Like, I have like basically had a period for a couple of months now, would say like, yeah, it is. It's completely normal. So no, I did not have intercourse again for at least 4 months and I was terrified. I remember the first time I immediately like got on some very strong birth control after the abortion, like no more like playing around with frou-frou things. But like, I was still terrified. Like, even though like doctors will say like, you have this 1% chance of getting pregnant, like it still is something that will cross my mind. And definitely crossed my mind, the first time I had sex afterwards.
And that couldn't have been easy to do by any stretch of the imagination. I keep thinking about your family in the next room. Have you told them since? Have you opened up to them? Did they get any inkling that something was wrong, or is it still a secret?
No, it is not a secret. It was really hard to tell my parents about it. And what I like have emphasized to people that I've worked with is like, or even people that I've just had conversations about like abortion with, like, please don't ever feel like because I have done this or I've been so public, like that you should ever like feel like you have to be like, no, not every person is going to tell their parents they had an abortion. When my mom found out that I had been pregnant, my mom was like, that makes so much sense. And I don't know like how I didn't see the warning signs. Because I just kept like, she would ask me like how I was feeling or whatnot, and I just kept saying like, oh, I'm just hungover, because I truly had no idea. But in hindsight, she was saying like, there were warning signs that, I probably would have figured out that you were pregnant. Any person in my family that I have told, they've been very accepting and very loving, and honestly have said like, it makes them sad that I would feel like I had to go through something like that all by myself.
Fantastic. Because I mean, that's sadly not always the case. Do you know what I mean? And I guess that's part of the reason people keep it from the family in the first place. So I think you've been quite lucky in that respect. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We could talk for such a long time. And I just can't thank you enough for giving us such an honest interpretation of what you've been through. It's invaluable, absolutely invaluable. Before we go, we want to do a checkout. So when we checked in, we gave a word about how we're feeling today. We're going to check out with another word and see maybe if we've changed a bit. So just give me a word before we say goodbye.
I feel hopeful.
That's a fantastic word. I'm going to go with another H. I feel humble. Humble.
Okay.
And that's because of you. You're a superstar, and I wish you all the happiness in the world for the future. Well, there we have it. Another podcast, another Talley Talks podcast. Find it on all good platforms. Before we do switch off the receiver, that's an old-fashioned term, I am going to give our listeners a couple of directories in case you want some more information about said topic or you're looking for help. So we'll just give you a few. You can self-refer by contacting an abortion provider directly. We have the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. We have the MSI Reproductive Choices UK and the National Unplanned Pregnancy Advisory Service. Or you can go to your local NHS sexual health website and they can tell you about your eligibility and services in your area. Alternatively, you can speak to your GP and ask for a referral to an abortion service. The GP should refer you to another doctor if he or she has any objections to the abortion. And finally, you can contact a sexual health clinic, sometimes called family planning or a gum clinic, and ask for a referral to an abortion service. I do hope that helps. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time. Thank you for listening to the Talley Talk podcast. Remember to subscribe to our channel and be the first to access our weekly episodes. For the latest news and updates on the Talley App launch, follow @Talley.app on Instagram, or you can visit www.talleyapp.com. Thank you, and see you next time.